You see, stalactites grow down from the ceiling, while stalagmites... Oh god! Ah!
Hi everyone, it's your local Game Master Jimmy here. Welcome to the lore video of Piercers. Maybe you clicked on this video because you wish to uncover more knowledge of these ambush creatures known as Piercers, or maybe you clicked on it because you saw a stalactite with an eye and thought it was rather silly. In any case, I want to guarantee there will be at least one detail you haven't heard of yet as we explore the lore of Piercers in Dungeons & Dragons. Those of you familiar with the game, I primarily draw my sources from the Forgotten Realms, which builds a more concise form of information, but I will dip into other source material for the sake of clarity and elaboration. With that, let us dive into the first appearance and description of the Piercer, which comes from the Strategic Review number 3 and was written by Gary Gygax himself. With their stony outer casing, these monsters are indistinguishable from stalactites found on cave roofs. They're attracted by noise and heat, and when a living creature passes beneath their position above, they will drop upon in order to kill and devour it. Larger varieties will be with smaller ones. While this is a lovely description of the creature and paints a vivid picture of what these whimsical stalactites do, I went ahead and compiled the descriptions of several other sources to put a full description of what the Piercer is and how it has appeared throughout Dungeons & Dragons. Piercers are first and foremost a type of gastropod, a mollusk that dwells primarily on the material plane. They can grow as large as 6 feet in length and often extend from 1 to 6 inches across. While their weight can range, it can grow upwards to 500 pounds. Being mollusks, their primary portion of their body is a soft musculature that consists of their mantle, which fills out their exterior shell that they would formulate when they're young. They have eye stalks that would wrap around the carapace, making them almost indistinguishable from regular stalactites. Now, if you're close up to it, you could possibly distinguish that there was eye stalks wrapping around it. It was just very hard. They range from tiny to medium in size and live upwards to 4 years. The Piercer is carnivorous and would often target prey by first attaching itself to a ceiling with a sucker foot, and detached from the ceiling when it detected a heat source or heard creatures up to 120 feet below. They relied heavily on their ability to blend in with other naturally forming stalactites in order to surprise victims. An important distinction that should be made of the Piercer is that it was not a sentient creature. While this might change in its lifespan throughout the editions of Dungeons & Dragons, we first and foremost should consider they are simply acting out of its attempt to continue its exploits of eating. I will say some of the actions they are described to do further in this video and throughout the lore can also sound counter to this logic. So it could be subject to the world in which you want to determine whether they are sentient creatures or not. If it isn't apparent, Piercers were rather all-or-nothing creatures. They would drop from ceilings high up in hopes to concave the skull of a creature below. They did not take much effort to protecting themselves from such a fall. Either they hit, or they likely took the fall damage of the drop, as hitting the ground would usually leave the mollusk's shell cracked and the inner creature would be exposed to all external threats. And while they were able to secrete a mucus to deter larger creatures from eating them, this mostly worked only for small sections of exposed membrane, where the sucker foot and mouth were located, opposite of the Piercer end. This same mucus would also attract small prey to help them feed, but largely if they were fully exposed, they were likely dead because they were going to be eaten. Regardless of the fact that the Piercer actually hits a creature, they were actually even more vulnerable when they proceeded in their feeding process on a creature they hit. And if it definitely seems like a far chance that these creatures hit their mark, you'd kind of be right. For this reason, they would actually try to adjust their sucker foot on the ceiling, moving very slowly to be directly above prey that might have stood still for too long. And they would go for such long periods of time without actually eating. It was a believed fact that they had adapted to consume more than they normally could and preserve the nutrients to last a vast period of time. And they would do this through some form of second stomach. Expanding on the idea though, when one Piercer would strike at its prey, others in close proximity would actually crawl down the sides of walls to join in the feeding, so they would all get food. Piercers are, for this reason, creatures that dwell amongst their own kind in groups. They are believed to come in groups of 3 to 18 and tend to favor cave complexes with high traffic areas or close to the entrance. Although it should be noted that Piercers were rumored to have large subterranean colonies consisting of hundreds of groupings of them, but given their lack of sentience, there's not much to expand on here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and walk you through their entire lifespan from the beginning of their conception. Piercers are intersex, having all necessary reproductive organs to reproduce with one another. Although this is the case, they do mate in pairs, in a process that involves them crawling to the cavern floor and stretching out their shells after performing an elaborate dance to consummate the process. This also often leads to them getting killed prematurely, so they're really on an uphill battle here for creating more. Of course, if they did survive this process, they could lay up to a clutch of 6 to 8 chicken-sized eggs, and they would do that in the cracks of walls or floors. And I know you hear eggs and you're thinking, oh man, food, that sounds good right now. And to answer your curiosity, they were said to actually taste like snails, but with a bit of a bitter aftertaste. You could really call it a bit of a pierce cargo. Alright, I'm sorry, that was bad. I'll move on. An important note before I continue to their larval state, but to some degree throughout the lore, and an important note before we go to their larval state, is that to some degree, in the earlier editions, it was believed that piercers are supposed to be younger forms of ropers. These large stalagmite creatures that were monstrosities that had tendrils that can snag creatures and eat them in their great maw. And in this line of thinking, it is believed that the larva actually gathered the nutrients from the deceased victims of the roper by waiting in the mouth of the roper for the creatures it consumed. Now, keep this mindset in mind for later. The larval state of the piercer looked drastically different from that of its pointy, older kind. They began as pointy-tailed, slug-like creatures. They would immediately work on feeding on fungus for nutrients, grit, and sand to start forming their shell, doing all of this with a radula, essentially the tool that was used as a mouth for mollusks. Over a few months, these creatures would hone a thin point for their shell, which would fully become their whole shell over time. And if this was able to develop to about a foot in length, this is around the time they would develop their eye stalks, which they would formulate. And ultimately, this also tells you that up until this time, several months in, they were just working blind. After this time, though, they would begin their climb to ceilings and use their newly pointed shells to drop from above. They would rely on killing creatures for any form of subsistence from meats to water from this point on, but would largely rely on larger piercers that could secure guaranteed kills to help get their nutrients better. And although their mucus secretion was used to ward off large predators, it did still come in handy for getting small amounts of nutrients from tiny bugs and creatures that actually were allured to it. To note, in some earlier editions of the game, their mucus actually had a numerical 1 damage assigned to it for creatures that came in contact with it. And this was really used to dissuade creatures from attacking them, as well as wizards from coming to procure them with their 4 health in the early editions. While I can't say there is any hard evidence as to many variants of the piercer, we have 2 creatures that strongly resemble them and can be seen as either next stages of the piercer or evolutions. For starters, we have the roper. I plan to do a video over ropers at some point, so I don't want to go too far into them, but they are large stalagmite creatures that are much bigger than piercers and have tendrils that grab creatures and consume them. Oddly enough, piercers are known to settle closely to them, and it is believed that ropers will actually use piercers as a resource, allowing them to drop before attacking potential prey. If the roper isn't actually a future stage in the piercer's lifestyle, they definitely have a symbiotic relationship. And our other next creature, which could be considered some form of variant, I am actually very interested as well, and didn't actually do a whole lot of research into them too much before this, and that is the dark mantle. They oddly resemble piercers, but they have some form of developed tendrils and a plumed webbing frame that they use to drop down, imitating stalactites as well, and they would land on people's heads and suffocate them, wrapping their tendrils around their neck. They're pretty nasty and they sound awesome, so I'm really excited for that one. And maybe I'll take a moment in this to let everyone know that I actually put out a poll, usually weekly or every other week, about what monster I should look into next. And if you're interested, you could vote on that poll. I usually post them on Wednesdays, so look for those. While most of my source materials draw from the Forgotten Realms, I want to dip briefly into another setting in Dungeons & Dragons, specifically to talk about the only ever mentioned deity of piercers, and that is Planescape. In the module Turn of Fortune's Wheel, we are introduced to Kurgaz Vist, the Unerring Avalanche. Referred to as a demigod of piercers and ropers, Kurgaz had the stat block of a actual just normal piercer with just a couple small changes. Kurgaz would come back alive every 24 hours if he was slain, and he could teleport once a day. Now, Kurgaz's whole gimmick was he never missed. If they fell and hit the ground, they would fixate on that target and teleport to them, attempting again and again and again, day after day, as you held your shield above your head, blotting what little sun shone on you before, until they landed their mark. Kirgaz may only have had the stats of a 1/2 challenge rating creature, but he was the embodiment that you could fail time after time, again and again, but you could never succeed unless you got yourself up and tried again. Dream on, Kirgaz. So we've talked mostly about what we have here available for a Piercer in Dungeons & Dragons, but let's take a moment to look at the Piercer in 2024 5e D&D. I want to look at its art, give you some of my thoughts on if it reflects how a Piercer should look, and then talk about the creature's description and see if we have built anything new to draw upon. A lot of this will be opinionated, but it's a good time for you to also share your thoughts on the Piercer in the comments. Let me know when or how you plan to use these little guys. That said, let's go through a description from 2024 5e D&D. Piercers resemble stalactites, but each has a toothy maw and a single eye. They hang from cavern ceilings, along routes frequented by denizens of the Underdark. Piercers might lurk from months at a time, waiting for any creature of their approximate size to pass underneath. When potential meals move below, piercers release their grip and plummet, intent on impaling in a single strike. If they're successful, piercers consume their meals and then slowly climb to a new ambush position. If they miss or fail to slay their target, piercers attempt to squirm away, but they're easily dispatched by creatures aware of their presence. Piercers are the larval form of ropers. Young piercers seek to move as far from ropers as they can to avoid ropers' undiscerning hunger. Many piercers migrate vast distances through the Underdark, often to caverns or buried ruins near the surface. So, wow. This is definitely a change from what narrative we have been building thus far. While personally I've actually been on the side of piercers being a larval form of ropers, I didn't expect this blatant nod to be as overt. I want to talk about the art for a moment, and I want to give credit where credit is due to Oliver Bernard, who did this outstanding work for the Piercer. They truly illustrate the horrifying visage for the Piercer, although if we follow the description we have built up until now, this is not really how they would look like, and I know I can't be wanting to judge because I am not an artist. They had originally had 2 eye stalks that would wrap around the length of their shell, providing to be the only real way to discern if they were a stalactite. And not to be too hard on the art, that's not unfortunately where the mouth goes. It would go underneath the shell at its base. That said, if we follow the description used for this edition alone, the illustration matches the Piercer perfectly. And to be completely forward, it actually does look like a baby roper. And to really give a last praise to it, none of the art previously to this has ever looked how the Piercer is actually described, so no one has really got it on point. Funny enough for how it is described. It's just the eye stalks would probably look really weird in the art. So moving on from that, and let's go back to the description. I found the notes that stated the Piercer would move as far away from the roper a little sad, honestly. I think they actually have a great deal of synergy, and building a narrative that they wouldn't work together, even though they have the capability to be successful, is very sad. I always picture the nasty combination of the roper restraining a creature in with its tendril and reeling them underneath a Piercer. Oof. That'd be nasty, just pulling it, restraining it, and then the Piercer falls from above. Ah, beautiful. So I don't want to give this new monster manual version of the Piercer too hard of a time. It does give a more definitive direction as to the way D&D views the Piercer, so I can't really complain. Unfortunately, that probably means we won't be seeing a Piercer mating dance anytime soon, just the roper mating dance, which I'm hoping is just the exact same thing, would be oddly great. So the next time your party enters a dark, dripping cavern, and you hear nothing but the soft plink of water on stone, tell your rogue to stop looking down for traps, because the real danger might be hanging above their head. Thanks for watching, everyone. I want to give a shout out to my friend Grace, who did the opening dialogue for this episode. They're a very talented voice actor, and I'll leave a link to their website in the video so you can check that out. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the weird and wonderful monster that is the Piercer, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Maybe about your next encounter with Piercers or even ropers. Until next time, keep your torches high and your perception checks higher. I'm Jimmy, your local game master. See you in the next one.